Welcome to the latest episode of the PiXL Drone Show, our weekly podcast where we talk to people who play an important role in the drone industry. And today we have a special guest because nobody plays a more important role than the FAA. As always, my co-hosts are Cara Murphy and Greg Reverdio. And today we have Kevin Morris on the show. And Kevin is the official spokesperson and pretty much social media star of the Federal Aviation Administration. And if you fly drones, I'm sure you'll have seen him or heard of him. And if you haven't, then I would urge you to go to the FAA website. Just Google FAA Drone Zone or FAA UAS and you'll find all you need to know. Today we're going to be talking with Kevin about drones and about safety, especially in light of the upcoming Superbowl event this Sunday and the recent drone video that you might have seen of a drone flying over a football stadium. Kevin, thank you so much for being our guest today and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Well, we're going to dive right in. Can you give us perhaps a short introduction about who you are, what you do for the FAA, and how you got involved with drones?
Sure. So I've been with the FAA for about 15 years, but I think my interest in drones started well before that. When I was about a 12 or 13-year-old kid, my neighbor next door built RC aircraft, remote-controlled aircraft. And he'd take me out to flying fields, and we got to fly the airplane around. And I was really fascinated with RC airplanes back then and just airplanes in general. Little did I know, 30 years after that, I would be involved with the same type of equipment, but we just call them drones now. So when I joined the FAA, after about 10 years, the drone industry really started to pick up in terms of what we think of drones as now. So I started to get involved with that about 5-6 years ago. I was in the flight standards division of the FAA, so we were in charge of making policy, guidance, regulation, all related to drones. And I started to think, well, it's great that we make all this stuff, but if we can't figure out a way to get the information out to the general public in a way that they understand it, it's kind of all for naught. So I started to get more involved with outreach and eventually ended up working for headquarters in our Office of Communications and then became the FAA drone guy, if you will, and doing a lot of our outreach and interviews like this and trying to help the community understand how they can fly safe.
Awesome.
So our audience ranges from beginner to expert, and in general, can you just describe what the role is of the Federal Aviation Administration, what role it plays?
Sure. So our mission here at the FAA has really been the same since our inception, which is to keep our nation's airspace as safe as possible. So everything we do in the FAA is geared toward ensuring the safety of our nation's airspace, whether that's traditional aircraft or manned aircraft, if you will, or now with the advent of really what I think is the future of aviation, which are drones. So our role and our mission really hasn't changed, even though the aircraft that are operating in our nation's airspace have.
So, Kevin, this is a question we see all the time, being confused or the information not being shared correctly online. The FAA is in charge of the National Airspace System. And in 2018, the FAA kind of reissued a statement saying that you guys being the FAA are in control of the airspace. Can you help us define what the national airspace is? Where does it start? Where does it end? And I think this is a point of confusion for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about national airspace, we really always throw in that third word, which is system. So we always talk about the national airspace system because it's more than just the air itself. It involves air traffic control. It involves our navigation equipment. It involves a lot of different things. So our national airspace system is what we're really working on keeping safe. With the advent of drones, it's really changed what we also call navigable airspace. And I think this is where a lot of people might get confused. So navigable airspace is that airspace that aircraft operate in, including areas for safe takeoff and landing. So I think maybe traditionally, if we back up 30 years or even 20 years, honestly, we look at navigable airspace as being, well, there's no way a helicopter could land in the middle of this forest. So there's no way this would be navigable airspace. And you might be able to make an argument for that so many years ago. That's all changed now. Drones can operate there. Drones can really operate anywhere. Their ability, which is also one of the benefits of drones, but their ability to take off and land from just about anywhere has sort of changed how we look at navigable airspace. So now, Greg, to your question, when we talk about where does airspace start, it really starts at the surface. pretty much anywhere. The only portions of airspace, if you will, and I use that term loosely here, and you'll see why, is indoors. The FAA does not regulate that airspace indoors, but outdoors, airspace begins at the surface and extends upward.
I have a quick follow-up question. Towards the end of your answer to my initial question, you had said that drones are the future of aviation, in your opinion. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, if you look at aviation in terms of what are our fastest growing segments, the industry that is continuously evolving and growing both with capability and technology is drones. Traditional aircraft, as we all know, have been around a long, long time. And it's not to say that traditional aircraft are going away. They're clearly not. But when you look at the capabilities of drones and some of the things that drones are able to do that traditional aircraft have done in the past, that's what's changing the landscape. I don't see drones as completely replacing traditional aircraft. I just don't think that's going to happen. But there are certain things that drones can do that really reduce the risk by not having a person sitting in an aircraft flying that mission. If you can do that mission with the drone and exponentially increase the safety as compared to a traditional aircraft, that's where drones are starting to shine. So when I made the comment, I think that's kind of the future. That's what I'm looking for. It's that capability of drones, which just, it seems like what they can do doubles every couple of years. I think that's what we're looking at, the future of aviation.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So with this episode of the show, we basically want to make sure that anybody who listens, whether they're seasoned drone pilots or just people new to the industry, basically understand the basics of the national airspace system. Now, we have different classes and we have controlled and uncontrolled airspace. Can you perhaps explain a little bit to our audience how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the tougher things to explain because as soon as you throw out the word uncontrolled, people immediately equate that to unregulated. And as we all know on this call, that's not really what it means. So the terms controlled and uncontrolled are really a function of air traffic control. So in controlled airspace, that is airspace that air traffic control normally provides separation and exercises control of aircraft in. Uncontrolled airspace is airspace in which air traffic control does not provide those services normally. So the regulations in terms of what you need to do, how you need to fly, those types of things, they really don't change operationally, controlled versus uncontrolled. I think for a drone pilot, the biggest thing to understand is that most of the time, if you're going to be operating in controlled airspace, you will need an FAA authorization to do so. And that changes a little bit depending on the types of controlled airspace, and we could really get down into the weeds on it, which gets a little confusing. But generally speaking, if most drone pilots understand this thing called controlled airspace is out there, it's usually around airports or larger cities, and I need an FAA authorization before I fly. I think we're off to a good start.
So basically, if you're in a large city area or close to an airport, you can pretty much assume that you're likely to be in controlled airspace.
Yeah, that's a pretty good assumption to make. And of course, we'd always follow that up with make sure you check either the Before You Fly app or any of our UAS service suppliers. Check that airspace before you fly.
Yep. A question we also get from people quite a bit online is the FAA was created to deal with manned aircraft originally. Why is it that unmanned aircraft now fall under the FAA's jurisdiction?
So, Greg, I'm gonna flip that question a little bit and do a quick little government slide to the left on you here. I would say that the FAA wasn't created to deal with manned aircraft. The FAA was created to help regulate and ensure the safety of aviation. Now, in full disclosure, obviously at that time, we're really talking about manned aircraft. However, the advent of unmanned aircraft or drones doesn't, again, really change that mission. As we all know, drone is an aircraft, and aircraft operating in our national airspace system fall under the jurisdiction of the FAA to make sure that that drone is being flown safely, properly, so that it's not going to interfere or hit anything it's not supposed to, and that the people that it might be flying around wouldn't be injured, or is flying in a manner that's safe for those people on the ground too. So even though when we started out as the FAA, we were dealing with piloted aircraft, and now we're dealing with sort of the drone world, the mission hasn't changed. It's the same mission. It's our same focus on ensuring safety.
So can you describe the difference between recreational drone pilots and Part 107 certified? Why were these two different classifications created in the first place?
So it really sort of follows what we do for the different classifications of airman certificates for manned aircraft. When we look at drones, there's clearly two types of drone operators that we're talking about. Ones that want to do this professionally, commercially, if you will, and ones that just want to fly their drone for fun. They like getting out on the weekends and just kind of flying their drone around. So when we came up with Part 107, I think now is a good time to remind people that Part 107 isn't the commercial rule. Although, to be fair, we reference it a lot as the commercial rule because most people that go through the Part 107 and get their remote pilot certification are operating commercially. So we kind of use that term frequently. However, that didn't make sense for those people that just wanted to fly their drones for fun. So we did a lot of work in coordinating and collaborating with industry, different trade groups, different organizations, to find out what's the best way to ensure that we can still allow kids to fly drones for fun or adults to fly drones for fun without having to go through the steps of earning an airman certificate. So that's why the two sort of groups, if you will, were created so that we can keep the excitement of flying drones, which has been around a lot longer than I have, but to keep that excitement there without overburdening that community that just wants to fly for fun.
Yeah. So besides the rules from the FAA, if you are going to fly a drone, there's also some local rules sometimes that you have to keep in mind. For instance, you cannot fly a drone in a national park. Can you elaborate on that? Like, what other rules do people need to be aware of?
Yeah, it's sort of a kind of a two-piece or two sides of that coin, right? You've got the FAA rules, and we deal with once you get up in the air. We kind of provide the guidance and the rules you need to follow. But as you're pointing out, there are a lot of cities, there are the national park system, there are a lot of different areas that they don't want people flying drones for a variety of reasons. It could be for the enjoyment of the park, it could be for security reasons, it could be for liability reasons. It's always recommended that you check with wherever you're flying to make sure that you're in compliance with their drone ordinances. Now, they may have ordinances that say, we don't allow drones to take off or land. That's kind of the national park system where they say, drones taking off or landing drones within the national park boundaries are not prohibited. So it's always recommended that you do check and make sure that you're in compliance with local ordinances and regulations as well.
We often hear people say, I own the airspace above my property, and quite often people are quoting the Cosby case from 1946. Can you talk about property ownership, airspace ownership, and what are the limits there, and why maybe people may be confused with the Cosby case?
Well, let me see if I can wade into that water, Greg. I do have electrodes hooked up to me that are controlled by our lawyers right now, so if I veer off course, I'll know about it right away. But the simplest answer to that is going to be property ownership doesn't equate to airspace ownership. I think one of the first things we talked about here in our segment was that the FAA controls the airspace really down to the surface. And that's no different than in your backyard or any of the property. The Cosby case, which was a while ago, didn't necessarily deal with airspace ownership. It technically dealt with the ability to use the land you owned. For example, if you owned a farm and aircraft were flying over it so low all the time that your animals couldn't do what you needed them to do, they wouldn't produce or whatever. That's kind of what the Cosby case was about. Now, it talked about aircraft flying low in the airspace, but it was not about who owns the airspace. It was about somebody's ability to use the land that they own. So you really need to look at that Cosby case and read through it to understand what it's getting at. But the simple answer is you do not own the airspace above your house up to 73 feet or 400 feet. I've heard various numbers, but you do not own the airspace above your property.
Yeah, 73 feet is often quoted because that's what came out, or 83 that came out of the case. So yeah, thank you.
So with the drone industry being like the safest and both the fastest growing form of aviation, some people feel that the drone rules are complicated and might be burdensome to an extent. How does the FAA view it, and how does the FAA try to create rules for the drone industry that actually enable and facilitate the growth of this industry?
Yeah, the current, and I'm going to emphasize the current safety record of the drone industry is very good. They definitely have a very good safety record. That's not to say we haven't had incidents. We all know that there's been collisions with drones and manned aircraft. We definitely want to limit that. But when we look back at the advent of drones, as we kind of use them in this conversation, drone history isn't really that old in the United States. And I understand drones have been around a long, long time, but in the vernacular that we're talking about drones, where you walk into your favorite electronics shop and you buy something that's capable of flying 9,000 feet and 100 miles an hour, that's relatively new. So the history, the data, the experiences, we just don't have that long of a history to go back and say everything's great, everything works. But I think what you're seeing is the FAA adapt. When we looked at Part 107 when it first came out, we all know no night flying was something that really irked a lot of people. Once we got some history with night operations through our waiver process, we adapted and modified that rule. So that became part of it was kind of, we call it the operations over people rule, but that included the ability to fly at night as part of the permissible rule. So I think what you're seeing is as the drone industry continues to operate safely, you're going to see regulations change in favor of allowing more operations. But that's something that we want to make sure that we do. And I know we've heard this term a lot, but the crawl, walk, run phase of sort of evolution on the FAA side, we want to make sure we don't get too far ahead of ourselves and start to have incidents and start to have accidents. We don't want to have that event create rules. We'd rather have a rule and slowly modify it based on the history and experience of drones so they can continue to operate safely.
So there have been a number of false positives as far as drone sightings go. So if you look at reports, people claim that they've seen, or pilots will claim that they've seen a drone flying 5,000 feet above ground level. And a lot of the times it's a plastic bag or a bird. How do you deal with these reports?
So we track all that through our air traffic facilities. Anytime a pilot makes a report of a drone sighting, that is tracked. As you can imagine, it's very difficult, if not impractical, to sort of go back and verify whether that was a drone or not at this time. Because it could have been a bird, it could have been a plastic bag. It's not something that we really are capable to investigate and nail down definitively. Did the pilot see a drone, or did the pilots just see a dark object go slinging by the flight deck window? It's very difficult for us to do that, but we do track. And we do identify areas where there are a lot of sightings, and we do identify areas where in particular there's a lot of sightings, and then we take a look at what's happening around the area. Is there a park nearby? I mean, we try to narrow down the legitimacy of that that drone sighting to eliminate these I think you call them false positives, but eliminate these issues where are they really seeing a drone, are they really not? And if we do think it's an area where, you know what, there's been a lot of sightings within this little 2-mile radius, there's a little park there, then we do send somebody out to take a look at what's happening there. Are people really flying drones there? Is this something that we need to do some outreach and education on so we track it that way?
Okay. And I was going to say, there are people who don't like drones at all. And do you pick up on a pattern of maybe some false positive reporting there with people who claim to be a pilot or claim to be someone they're not, but are just reporting these sightings?
So one of the things that we do, and this isn't just limited to drones, but every complaint that comes into the FAA we take seriously. We don't try to make a determination on the other end of the phone line. Hey, this person is just they hate drones, they do whatever. But we take every complaint seriously, and we look at every single complaint. So we don't box people into certain areas right away just based on our feelings or based on how many times they call. But certainly we have limited resources at the FAA, just like any agency or any company. So when we get these calls, we do try to focus on, all right, what do we think is legitimate? Is it worth sending an inspector out? Is it worth committing additional resources to investigate this? We do look at it from that angle, but we wouldn't simply dismiss a call because we thought somebody was calling us too often or we just thought they hated drones.
I want to shift gears and talk about some operational things with flying drones. And the first one is flying at night. This is a topic, especially recently for some reason. There's been a lot of discussion online about who can fly at night. Can you really fly your drone at night, especially on the recreational side of things? Can you clarify the rules on both sides, Part 107 and USC 44809, which is the recreational rules, and especially with the use of lights?
Yeah, so let's jump into the easy one, which is Part 107, where our new rule that rolled out, I believe it was in April of last year. That really spells out exactly how you can fly at night under Part 107. And it talks about the lighting requirements. It talks about anti-collision lighting. It talks about a flash rate. It talks about being able to be seen for at least 3 statute miles. But one of the interesting things about that rule in Part 107 is that it's a performance-based rule. If you notice in the rule, we don't get into how that strobe is manufactured. We don't get into how often it must flash. We didn't do that because the FAA, just as a holistic approach, is shifting away from prescriptive type regulations and going to performance-based. So you as the drone pilot can make the determination, yes, this flash rate is sufficient enough where other aircraft can see my drone, or that this strobe can be seen for 3 miles, and make that determination without having to go through some sort of certification process for a strobe that you're putting on your drone. So Part 107 is pretty straightforward in terms of what you need to do and how you need to do it. For example, you have to be current, and that your recurrent test has to have happened after a certain date. That's kind of all laid out in there. It gets a little more messy for the recreational flyer, simply because Congress, when they wrote the statute for recreational flyers, 44809, Greg, as you were pointing out, one of the things they threw in there was that here are the core rules that Congress wants drones to follow. And in that core rule, they said they also need to follow the safety guidelines of FAA-recognized community-based organizations. And that's something that the FAA has been working on for the past couple of years to come up with how that recognition of community-based organizations is going to go. But in the meantime, we've issued some guidance on how we can sort of meet that rule in the interim. And what we've said is that there are, I believe the term is aero modeling organizations. There are existing aero modeling organizations out there that have published safety guidelines. And we expect recreational flyers to follow those until the FAA starts officially recognizing community-based organizations. So how does this all tie into night flying? Well, if you read the statute in 44809, you'll notice there's nothing in there about flying at night. So what happens then is the safety guidelines are going to determine what you need to do to fly at night. So as a recreational flyer, if you want to know what you need to do to fly at night, you need to be following the safety guidelines of an existing aero modeling organization. And we have an advisory circular out that helps explain that. 91-57B as in Bravo helps explain what we expect to do in the interim. We are updating that advisory circular to the C as in Charlie version here, hopefully sometime this year. This summer would be my hope. That will help also clarify it a little bit more. So recreational flyers, if they want to fly at night, need to follow the safety guideline policies of an existing aero modeling organization.
Okay, that was going to be my follow-up question. You answered that. When is the Charlie version of that advisory circular coming out? So I'm glad it's still on the radar. I know a lot of people have been waiting for that, so we can get. This is the last piece of 44809 that needs to be put in place, right? Once we're done with with this and the CBOs, then everything is in place, right?
Yes. Well, I hope so. Anyway, as well as you have been waiting for that advisory circular, I had a large part in writing that advisory circular. I am also waiting for that advisory circular to come out. It did go out for public comment a while ago, and we did receive a lot of really good constructive comments on that. So, of course, we took that back and are going through those comments. But yes, the really the last piece that's sort of hanging out there, Greg, to your point, is the FAA officially recognizing community-based organizations. I can tell you that all the background technological components have been in progress for a long time to developing how this is going to work and what system we're going to use and how we're going to vet and all that type of stuff. So it's all there. And my hope is that sometime maybe late spring or early summer, you'll see that advisory circular and we'll be able to start recognizing community-based organizations.
Awesome.
Great. I want to kind of circle back to drone operations over people. Can you explain to us who and when and under what conditions are people allowed to fly their drones over other people?
Right. So the operations over people rule, which again included the night portion of it, but I mentioned that because the actual flying over people rule was also based on waiver data. So we took a look at what people had been requesting and getting approved to operate over people for under the waiver provisions, and then seeing how that worked and then baking that into the rule. So what we ended up doing is creating 4 different categories of drones to operate over people. And so to do that, your drone must fit into one of the 4 categories. And the first category, category 1, is something that the remote pilot themselves determine, and it's based on weight. It's for drones weighing 0.55 pounds or less, including any attachments. You can take a look at some of the requirements to operate over people. Categories 2 and 3 are, just keep it simple, are heavier drones. They have more kinetic energy, if you will, more impact force tolerance. And because of that, there are a little bit more requirements to fly a heavier drone over people. And then the category 4 are drones that are issued airworthiness certificates. So that's probably a very, very small segment of what we think of drones that are going to be issued actual airworthiness certificates, because as you can imagine, that's quite a process to go through to get that type of certification for a drone. Interestingly enough, too, the operations over people rule ties into remote ID. And I'm sure we're going to have some remote ID questions in this conversation. But there's certain things that if you want to do with your drone, or if you want to hover or loiter or circle or conduct sustained flight over people, there are ties into the requirement to be broadcasting remote ID. So if anybody's interested in flying their drones over people, before you just go out and do that, make sure you take a look at the rule, or you can look at our website. We've got some plain language information on it as well, and really understand the different categories of drones and what you need to do.
So since you brought up remote identification, can you briefly, perhaps, because it's a pretty complicated topic, but can you briefly explain to our audience what that's about and how that's going to be important for people flying drones?
Yeah, so remote ID, when we published the notice of proposed rulemaking, I think may have been one of the rules that we received more comments on than any other rule, at least in my tenure here at the FAA. There were over 53,000 comments on remote ID. And if anybody's wondering, yes, we read every single one of those, and we have to address every single one of them. Some, as you can imagine, were much more constructive than others. Some were just simply telling us what they thought of us. Regardless, we did go through all of the comments on that to try to come up with the rule. And you did see some changes in that. So, for example, the network requirement had gone away based off the proposed rule and what you see on the books today. But I think when we talk about remote ID here, the biggest thing to remember is there's no compliance yet. We are still months away, years away before we get into mandatory compliance. So they're coming up September of this year. Manufacturers will start to be required to produce drones with remote ID capability. Consumers won't have to start using remote ID until September of 2023. So we're still a year and a half away before people really need to start worrying about how remote ID is going to work. But what it is and what we need it to do goes towards where I think the future of drones are going to be. We can't move forward with drones without having a way to adapt to the number of drones and the capabilities of the drones and what people want to do with the drones. You know, we think of, well, someday I'm going to be able to click a button on a website and the drone's going to deliver my package to my door within 20 minutes. And yeah, I do think we're going to get there at some point, but not without the infrastructure to support that type of operation. And that's where remote ID comes in. It's one of the incremental but very important steps to moving to like package delivery or beyond visual line of sight, like routine beyond visual line of sight operations with drones. So I understand some of the heartburn people might have with it, but it's an absolutely necessary step to utilize the capability and ensure the future of drones.
Yeah, I think it was back in 2013 that Jeff Bezos said that Amazon deliveries by drone will be routine in about 5 years, and here we are in 2022, and we're not quite there yet. And of course, a lot of it has to do with the complexity about routine drone operations beyond visual line of sight. Do you think that between now and September 23, that the remote ID might still be fine-tuned? Do you expect any changes to be made still, or is what we're looking at right now is pretty much what's going to be implemented?
I think it's, I hate to speculate on drones, or excuse me, I hate to speculate on remote ID because
Hmm.
it's just, I don't have a crystal ball with a lot of these things. But based on the fact that we are requiring manufacturers to produce a certain type of drone with remote ID, and we're also opening up the door for people to have sort of aftermarket modules, broadcast modules, as we call them. I don't think you're going to see a lot of change in the rule between now and September of 2023. That and the fact that to change a rule, it's a lot of work. And that's something I tell people a lot is like, we at the FAA don't get up in the morning thinking, hey, let's make some more rules. Most of us try to run away from rulemaking because it is a very difficult, challenging process
Yeah.
and a lengthy process. So just based on that, I don't think we're going to see a lot of changes in remote ID between now and September of 2023. But like Part 107, I would expect remote ID to continue to evolve over the years.
I'm going to make
Awesome.
a meme. I'm going to make a meme of that, Kevin. Kevin saying we don't wake up in the morning wanting to make regulation.
People might forget about that sometimes, that making rules is not always easy.
Right.
So the FAA is putting a lot of emphasis on beyond visual line of sight flying, or better known as BVLOS. What is the ultimate goal of this emphasis? Do you want to make these flights more routine? What challenges have you found with implementing this as well?
Yeah, Kara, that's absolutely right. Our goal with BVLOS, or beyond visual line of sight flying, is to make it repeatable, sustainable, normal, and routine. To make it just something that drones do all the time. That's the end goal. To get there is extremely challenging with drones. We look at a couple of the programs, the IPP program, which just wrapped up a little while ago and then evolved into the Beyond program. That's all there to sort of research and promote this beyond visual line of sight operation. We also have the BVLOS Aviation Rulemaking Committee that's meeting currently to take a look at, okay, when we start to get to this normalized beyond visual line of sight operation, how do we change the rules in Part 107 to support that? Similar to what we did for Ops Over People. So we definitely want to get there, and we are taking the steps to get there. But as you can probably imagine, it's challenging. It's beyond visual line of sight is very technology dependent. How is a drone being operated without the pilot being able to see it or the airspace around it going to detect another aircraft entering the area? What action is it going to take when it detects that? How reliable is that system? All that stuff is very technology based. And so the work that we're doing now with the Beyond program is investigating and researching that technology with industry to try to come up with those answers so that we can get to that just normalized BVLOS flying.
I have a follow-up on that actually regarding what the FAA is working on and kind of the schedule of things going forward. There was a big emphasis, obviously, on getting glance ready because that was a big part of the puzzle. And then remote ID was kind of the next thing. Now we're talking about BVLOS. What's the next thing that the FAA is looking to work on in that timeline once BVLOS is figured out, if we ever figure it out?
Well, so I think that, Greg, I think that's really going to depend on what innovations the drone industry has. So I think as the drone capabilities increase, there may be a point somewhere down the road, maybe after I retire, where we won't need to be limiting drones to 400 feet and below. That drones will start just simply incorporating into traditional aircraft routes and operating in those types of altitudes for efficiency and capabilities. So I really think that the drone industry, as it has done in the past 10, 15 years, when drones really started, no pun intending, to take off, I think that evolution of drones is just going to continue. And that evolution forces the FAA to be flexible and to adapt, which Believe it or not, and I can imagine the comments when I'm about to say this, but the FAA has done a very good job of adapting to drones. If you look at traditionally how this agency operates, the pace of aviation in the past, we had to throw all that out the window when it came to drones. Drones just evolved far too quickly for us to use all of our traditional methods to deal with it. And despite what some think, the FAA has actually done a really good job of being flexible and adapting to drone technology.
Actually, I have to agree with that. I mean, this is a technology that's evolving so quickly. And if you've been around aviation long enough, you know that the rest of the industry, the main aircraft industry, didn't do that until, did that 100 years ago, but the progress has been over 100 plus years. So yeah, I agree with you. I want to talk about another big project that the FAA worked on, and I know you were personally involved with that as well. Kind of your brainchild was trust. Can you tell us what trust is, who needs to take it specifically, and kind of what the program brings to people that want to fly?
Yeah, absolutely. The trust is kind of my baby, if you will. I had a lot of input and a lot of work with a lot of other people in developing that. First and foremost, the trust is a requirement from Congress. It's in the statute for 44809 that the FAA develop an aeronautical knowledge and safety test. So this was something that the FAA had never done previously. Normally, when we develop a test, we're doing this for some type of certification, airman certification, aircraft, whatever. Trust is very, very different than what we've done in the past. So what we try to do is develop a test, if you will, that would be available with extremely low barriers to get access to, and that would provide the minimum amount of safety information we need for somebody to fly a drone safely here in the United States. And that's a pretty tall order. I mean, most of the people, I'm assuming most of you have your Part 107 remote pilot certificate. You know the type of questions that were on that Part 107 exam. It's not like it's extremely difficult to take, but it's also not easy. We get into a lot of technical stuff on that exam. Well, we can't really do that with your recreational flyer who we want to take this test. It's just too much. So once again, we worked with industry. We brought in a cohort of industry representatives from manufacturers to organizations to schools to get an idea of how this test could work. What do we want to cover? What do we think is too deep? And the end product of all that collaboration was the trust. And then what we decided to do was have third parties administer the trust so that it's widely available to anybody that wants to take it. I think we're up to 16 or 17 test administrators for the trust. And that test it's online, it's free. It might take you 20, maybe 25 minutes if you slowly read through everything to take. It's a one and done thing. And who has to take it? Anybody that wants to fly a drone recreationally under Part 44809. There's no minimum age. There's no grandfathering. Well, I've got my remote pilot certificate, so I don't need to take it. No, if you're flying a drone recreationally under 44809, you need to take the trust.
Yeah, and I'm going to say it again, it is free. So if anybody is asking for money, you're in the wrong place. This is a free test that is provided on behalf of the FAA. So.
Yeah, and I believe you can take it as many times as needed, right, in order to pass.
Yeah, we designed it so I don't know that you can technically fail it. We designed it so that the only way you wouldn't get a certificate is if you just quit taking it at halfway through or something like that.
Yeah.
If you get a question wrong, it's going to explain why you got a question wrong and help you get to the correct answer. So again, it's something we want to be widely accepted by the public. And let's be honest, nobody wants to be forced to take a government test. We get it. But the work that we did on it and the partnership we have with our test administrators, we've done very, very well in the first, again, it's only been 6 or 7 months that the trust has been available. We've had pretty good numbers roll in based off just that first 6 or 7 months.
Well, it's all about education, I guess, right? You want to educate people who fly drones, and especially people who are new to flying drones. And I know a couple of years ago, I think in Germany it was, where they did a similar initiative, and they actually saw that the number of drone incidents went down significantly. as the education level of people flying those drones went up. So I think it's a very good move on the FAA's part to launch that. So we have all these drone rules. What happens if people break these rules? I mean, the FAA I don't think is set up to be a enforcement agency. Does the police get involved when people break rules? How does that work?
So I'll talk to the FAA side of it. We obviously have rules, and there are penalties for breaking the rules. However, we, a number of years ago, decided to move toward a compliance policy versus the enforcement side. This does not mean that we do not conduct enforcement. We are very, very well matured and geared to handling enforcement cases. We have inspectors, investigators, attorneys. That's something the FAA has done since its inception. However, we prefer education. It's much better for everyone involved, where if somebody does something wrong with the drone, and it meets certain criteria, obviously not everybody's going to be a candidate for education, depending on what you do with your drone, but we would try to educate first. A lot of times, in particular with drones, people just don't know. They didn't know they needed an airspace authorization to fly there. They didn't know they had to register their drone. I mean, there's just a lot of I didn't know. So instead of sort of rolling in with the hammer, we can come in and say, hey, here's some websites that can help you out. Here's what you need to know to fly your drone, and make it a positive experience versus a negative one, in hopes that, for one, they'll be more receptive to the message we're trying to send, which is always safety, and that they'll also share that experience with others. And we've found that type of education and counseling has a far greater positive impact on safety than rolling in with fines and maybe a certificate action. That being said, sometimes that's the course we do have to take. And the FAA has conducted enforcements. We have fined people. We have taken certificate action against drone flyers that do not follow the rules.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you talk about drone pros and their role with the FAA? Who should sign up? What would you consider a good candidate?
So drone pros is something we started with part of our FAA safety team a few years ago, and it has really been beneficial to the safety messaging and education. At the core, drone pros are safety representatives. They're volunteers that work with our FAA safety team all across the country. We sort of attach the title drone pro to individuals that are specializing in drones. Makes sense? But the real benefit of drone pros is that they're engaged and plugged into their local community. I can come on a show like this and I can do other interviews, but it's really hard for me to make connections to the local drone communities across the country sitting in a desk in Minneapolis or sitting in Washington, D.C. It's the drone pros that have those ties into their local community that we really depend on to share our safety message and make sure that people are flying safely. We're looking for anybody that's interested in helping us do that. You don't need to be a certificated remote pilot. You don't have to be a drone expert. There are so many different elements of drone flying that can help people out. For example, somebody might be really good at building them. Somebody might be really good at flying FPV. Somebody may be a great photographer or videographer. Somebody might really just love flying drones for fun and want to share their passion. Those would all be candidates for drone pros. You don't have to be a nationally recognized figure like Greg, let's say, to be a drone pro. It's really those people that are tied into their local community that want to help share our safety message. That's the people we're looking for.
Yeah, and I'm gonna add to this. The drone pros are so important to helping spread the safety message. There are so many layers that the FAA can get to, and even some other people can get to, until we have a network of people in the communities that are willing to help educate other people. This is a message we try to spread as much as we can with our own students. Be a mentor, and I think there's a big lack of mentorship in our industry. because it's still very young, and those drone pros kind of fill that role in there. So you see a lot of people like Vic Moss, for example. You see him going on different forums and helping answer questions. Vic is a drone pro, and that's kind of what we're trying to do as drone pros, is help the community flourish and be safer. So a very, very important role.
Yeah, so we're shifting gears here a little bit. This upcoming weekend is the Super Bowl weekend, and now we already know that you can't simply go out and fly a drone anywhere. I mean, prisons is a no-go, national parks, no-go. Near airports, you can't fly your drone there either. Super Bowl, big event, a lot of people. Can you tell us what the restrictions are going to be during that event and what a TFR is?
Sure. So we issue temporary flight restrictions, or TFRs, for a few different reasons. It's not just big events like the Super Bowl, but obviously when the President of the United States visits an area, we'll put up flight restrictions. There's sort of a standing, a lot of people call it a stadium TFR, that have anytime Major League Baseball or NFL games or certain things are happening, there are restrictions that go up around the stadium, but they all boil down to the same thing, which is the airspace is going to be controlled a little tighter than normally. So what we do is we restrict the aircraft, and again, drones are an aircraft. We restrict aircraft from entering that area without authorization. So for an event like the Super Bowl, where it's national attention and there's thousands and thousands of people in attendance, it falls under one of those national security elements that we try to make sure everyone attending the game is safe, everyone living around the stadium is safe. So the flight restriction goes into effect. And again, that flight restriction affects all aircraft, not just drones.
Now, last year there was a TFR on the pre-event, the pre-game events. Is it the same this year?
So last year the Super Bowl was in Tampa, and actually the year before that it was in Miami. And the NFL experience is kind of the pre-Super Bowl event that goes on in the week leading up to it. In Tampa and in Miami, those events were outdoors. So the airspace was restricted differently. Here in Los Angeles, it's actually a completely indoor event. So we don't have the sort of pre-Super Bowl flight restriction going up in effect like we did last year in Tampa.
Gotcha.
So what happens if someone flies near the Super Bowl during the game and while the TFR is in place?
So first of all, we hope nobody does that because it does tend to complicate things for a lot more than just the FAA. When we put up a TFR, for example, the Super Bowl TFR, we at the FAA don't just develop that within a bubble. We just don't say, well, we're going to put up the TFR, it's going to go this high and this wide, and that's just what we're going to do. That's not how it works. When we do something like this, we are in constant communication with our security partners. So national, local, so FBI, local law enforcement, sometimes even Secret Service, all of those security elements get together and decide on how this TFR is going to look, when it should go up, how far, how high, all that type of stuff, what aircraft are going to be operating in and out of it. So for the Super Bowl, we have this TFR established based on all of the work and cooperation with our security partners to make sure that they have the ability to do the job they need to keep everyone safe. That means if you're going to end up flying in the TFR without authorization, you can run into some serious problems. We have the ability through our security partners to identify drones operating in the TFR, to confiscate drones potentially. There could be potential criminal prosecution, fines in excess of $30,000. It can get pretty ugly pretty quickly if you're not aware of this TFR, which again goes back to one of our safety messages, which is always check the airspace before you fly, regardless of if you think, I'm down in Huntington Beach, California. I'm 20 some miles away from SoFi Stadium. I'll be totally fine here. You actually are going to be within that 30-mile ring restriction around the Super Bowl. So always check airspace before you fly. You just don't want to be somebody flying in a TFR when you're not supposed to.
Quick follow-up. Why 30 miles in particular?
Again, so that goes back to the work we do with our security partners. What we need to do is make sure that they have the time and space to identify any aircraft entering the TFR. Again, this is not just a drone restriction TFR. All aircraft are prohibited from flying in the TFR unless they have authorization. So in our work that we do with our security partners in designing this and finding out their needs, that's the reason the restriction exists at that distance. It's to give them the time, energy, and space to do what they have to do to keep everyone safe.
So for the people who are watching this this episode of the PiXL Drone Show on YouTube, they will now have seen the map that we just included here. For anybody else who's listening to the podcast, where can they find information about this TFR? Where do they go?
We have a page dedicated to the Super Bowl, FAA.gov/Super Bowl, and it's got all the information on it, not only for drones and the TFR, but also for general aviation pilots that may be wanting to fly in the week leading up to the Super Bowl, or even flying in the day of. So our FAA website will have all the latest information, including the TFR information.
Does that also show up in the Before You Fly app from the FAA?
Yes. Yeah, the flight
Okay, so
restriction
people
will
should-
show up. So if you use our Before You Fly app and you want to fly and the flight restriction is active, it will show up.
It will show up. All right. So it should be fairly easy for people to find out when and where and how far away from the stadium.
Yes.
Cool.
So as we're getting towards the end of the interview, I want to switch gear and talk about kind of the future of the industry. What are some of the challenges that you've seen and that you foresee in the future as this industry grows, and especially as it grows so fast?
I think there's two main elements that I see as being challenges really for the FAA. One is to keep pace. We've talked about this earlier in the call, where you look at the rapid expansion of traditional aviation in its infancy. That has sort of petered out over time. We don't see massive innovation and massive development at the pace that we do on the drone side. I mean, sure, we're getting into supersonic travel, things like that, which is really exciting and cool, but it's not happening at the pace where drones are. So drones are really elevating at a pace that is challenging for the FAA to keep up with in terms of adapting to what's out there. So while a new technology might roll out tomorrow, which is fascinating and exciting for everyone, how that safely fits into our national airspace system is something that the FAA has to look at through risk and analysis. And how does that affect air traffic? How does it affect security partners? How does it affect the flying public in general? So we have to look at this and continue with our, and I'm going to use this term again, the crawl, walk, run phase of the development. So while the drone industry is evolving at just incredibly rapid pace, the FAA is keeping up, but it's going to be keeping up at a much slower, deliberate, steady pace to ensure we keep that level of safety. We want to be able to say drones are the safest form of aviation today, tomorrow, and 5 years from now. I think the other side of that, Greg, the other thing that I feel is one of our challenges is doing what we're doing right here, trying to educate people. So many people just don't know. They don't know that there are rules, and they don't know that there are resources to help them fly drones safely. So how we get that word out? How do we share the messaging? How do we use our drone pros? How do we use interviews like this to help educate people and to understand why the rules are there and how they can follow the rules? I think that's going to be our kind of continuing challenge because you can't walk into your favorite electronics store and buy a Cessna 172, but you certainly can walk in there and buy a drone. And both of those are going to be aircraft operating the national airspace system. So how do we make that education available to that person? That's going to be one of our big challenges.
Yep, that's the million-dollar question. Amen to that.
As the industry continues to grow, will the FAA team that oversees drones grow with it?
Absolutely. And we're seeing that now. We are seeing a sort of an internal evolution on how we handle the drone world, if you will. We have people that are becoming more experienced with drones. Kevin's guess at what's coming down the road, I think at some point you'll have some safety inspectors that will be drone specific safety inspectors, like we have traditional pilot safety inspectors out there. I think that evolution is all sort of coming within the FAA. We have lines of business, and that's just an internal FAA term, but different groups in the FAA that are dedicated to drones. We have our UAS integration office that's simply dedicated to drones. We have groups within flight standards that are just dedicated to drones. So we're seeing that now, and I think as drones continue to grow, and again, I'll say it, me personally, I think they're the future of aviation. The FAA will respond and reflect that change.
So you've kind of touched up on that a little bit earlier, but how can the drone industry help spread the message and help with all of these challenges that you just mentioned?
I think knowledge that being the first important piece. Make sure you understand what the rules are, and understand how you can explain that to someone, because being able to explain a rule to someone is worth its weight in gold. Because if you just tell them there's part 107, you need to go read that, or even section 44.809, go read that. I mean, their eyes glaze over if they're not into that type of world where they're used to seeing that type of information displayed that way. It's just confusing. So having that ability to explain the rule to somebody and then connect with them on the local level, I think word of mouth is going to be our biggest asset here as we move forward. I'm going to go back to the drone pros, and that's exactly what we hope that they do, is spread this word and share the information. Hopefully we can continue to do that, as well as the FAA. If something goes wrong, we can help educate and counsel and help spread that word. But it's really going to have to be something that's organic. We look at traditional aviation, there's a pilot culture, and that pilot culture is developed over 100 years. The way pilots do things, we do things the right way when nobody's looking. Why? That's just the way we do things. And we want to get that culture into the drone community as well. Hey, nobody's out here, nobody sees what I'm doing, but I'm still going to do it the right way, because that's just the way I do things as a drone pilot. That's kind of our goal.
That makes a lot of sense. Keep focusing on safety and education, I think, and hopefully we'll get a lot of people more involved and more knowledgeable about how you safely and responsibly fly these drones. Last question of this interview, and perhaps an easier, more fun one as well. What is your favorite drone to fly, Kevin?
I would put myself in the category of a very novice drone pilot. I've flown a drone. I don't want to say the name just because that might get me into a little bit of trouble, but it's probably one of the most popular drones ever produced. I've flown that one a few different times. The one thing I haven't done that I really would like to try is FPV flying. And I do have some people that have thrown offers my way. I'm going to try to take them up on that. I think that would be really interesting. Hopefully I don't get sick and throw up from it, just because I think it could be crazy fun and cool. But I do like flying a drone. It is a lot of fun. It takes me back to, again, when I was 12 years old and being able to fly that RC control. I think it was a Piper Cub type airplane around. It's just so much fun. And I don't even do it professionally. So I love flying drones. I'm excited to try some of the new things that are out there, just because it looks really, really cool. Just be honest. It's really cool and fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in terms of getting the actual flying experience and the feeling of being up there in the air, you probably can't get any closer than with an FPV drone. So that would definitely be a thing to try, I think, for you. Kevin, thank you so much for being with us today on the show. I thought it was a very educational and informative conversation we had. For all the people that are listening and either watching this on YouTube, please be sure to go to the FAA website if you don't know what the rules are when it comes to flying drones. Also, please be sure to use the Before You Fly app or a similar app that tells you when and where you can fly your drone safely. And if you're going to watch the Super Bowl event this weekend, please do yourself and all of us in the drone community a favor and don't fly your drone anywhere near this event, anywhere near this stadium. If you've enjoyed this episode of the PiXL Drone Show, please be sure to subscribe and share it on social media. We air every Tuesday morning, and the more people listen to us, the bigger the show becomes and the better we can make this show. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll be back with another episode next week.